I almost had you that time, God said with frustration and a trace of bitterness. Rexfidus looked somewhat smug and superior as he sat back and stretched longingly. He cocked an eyebrow at Gord and, with an unwinking gaze fixed upon the young man, said, "Perhaps it is the hour, and you are tired, although you do not seem to have remarkable skill at learning. Well, another day?" "No," responded Gord, emphatically, but still he hoped politely. "I can manage an eighth game, and this time I suggest you be on guard, sir, for I intend to win. Care for a game of Dragonchess, dear viewer? Tonight, Roll of a Tangent shall dissect another tale for you. Debuting on the podcast is Gary Gygax, father of all role-playing games, creator of Dungeons and Dragons, and at the time of this short story's publishing, a somewhat novice figure in the writing world. First published in Dragon magazine in the August 1985 issue, the 100th issue, the tale at Moonset Blackcat Comes, say that 5 times fast, desires to accomplish a couple of goals. It introduces us to the titular character, the burglar Gord, and the all-new rules for Dragonchess, and, of course, attempts to entertain the reader throughout. The story begins like any good fantasy yarn in taverns. Gord and his barbarian friend Chert are on the prowl for new experiences. Not satisfied by the usual drink, Blackcat seeks a new venture to sink his teeth into. He comes upon the Ship and Crowns, an establishment that provides games of different varieties, where a man can relax and play all kinds of exotic boards. Not long after, God meets a fellow gamer named Rex Felix, who proposes a dastardly wager, which sets out our hero on the path of thievery and high adventure. At moonset, the black cat comes. So that's the story that we have today. All of us have read it. Dear viewers, I want to apologize from the bottom of my heart for the circumstances that you do not see the beautiful faces of uh, the co-host and myself. The internet within my household has went down, so unfortunately we have to do this the old-fashioned way on my mobile data. And to make sure that it lasts, we have had to make these measures. But such is the thing. Such is the way of things sometimes. Let's discuss this story by Gygax. Actually, why don't you start us off? What did you think of this tale?
I think I if I were to use one word to describe the story, it would be delightful. It's a very pleasant read. Uh, a very old style adventure story featuring a. I mean, it is a caper story. It's a it's a little bit like fantasy Ocean's 11 kind of thing, and then we have a couple of interesting characters. the the I think the interesting I think the really interesting thing for me is Gary Gygax starts off this with a forward, which I don't know if it was in the original uh, publication in Dragon magazine, where he says this sounds a lot like the Grey Mouser, but it's not really. And I don't know, man. Feels like the gentleman doth protested too much or something. It does it really does feel like the Grey Mouser, um, but in a I and perhaps at that time it might come across as derivative, but in the 20 odd years, in the slightly less than 20 years it's been published since, it's a lot more refreshing than it might have been, which is maybe a reversal of the stories like Elric of Melniboné, which could feel like it is less original than it should have been. I think the pacing of the story is pretty good. It mostly manages to sustain a fairly captivating pace, and the story told is also interesting enough to keep me engaged. Perhaps the only thing I feel is missing is why is it that Chert did not feature more prominently in this particular story? It's a bit of a shame. Chert is, well, let me just put it this way. My biggest problem with the story actually is Chert. So Chert is like a stupid version of Conan.
A very stupid version of Conan, yes.
A stupid version of Conan with intelligence as Dumpstead. And not only that, he is positively annoying in the story, and he doesn't do anything except, I want more beer and I want to get my hands on the serving wenches. That's all he does in this particular short story. So I don't feel like it, on that at least, it didn't have the vibe of Grey Mouser and Faf. Is that how you say? I can't pronounce it. But it is a reduction in it's
Quality?
it's a reduction of the story, not an improvement of that particular trope, I feel.
I have to agree with you that it is definitely a reduction, but at the same time, I do have to say, as someone who has been on a lot of night outs with friends and individuals, there's always a Chert at your table. This raunchy guy who's just here to drink and flirt with girls. He doesn't, somebody asks him a question, he goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah," and then he sort of like looks to the other side and keeps doing his business.
I mean,
So at least it felt authentic. Yeah, sorry, go on.
well, there is that, but it does kill the dynamic of what is supposed to be a sort of a partnership between a thief and a fighter guy. That sort of story trope that is basically established by the Grey Mouser and Faf. I really can't do that name.
I think it's pronounced Fafard.
Fafard. Okay.
Fafard, yeah.
Fafard. All right.
You were
Thank you
so
for that.
far away.
Yeah. Close enough.
All
What
right.
about you, Anthony? What did you think of the story, Anthony?
Well, I have to say I'm very biased. I love myself some Gary Gygax, and I think this was written in a style of what is known in the gaming world as high Gygaxian. So very, very purple prose, very, lots of description, maybe overly descriptive, and a lot more, I was unfortunately a lot more telling than showing in some spots. I think He could have used a little bit more editing in spots, such as we watch him. Gary shows Gord killing 3 guards, and then Gord has to say, "Well, there's going to be guards up ahead, but 3 less." Like, yes, we know there's 3 less. We just watched you take a page or two to kill 3 of them. But now, why do we need to have you say as the character, "Yes, there's 3 less"? It seems very old-timey movie dialogue to me. I know that was his inspirations, probably
Yeah,
as well
or
as
like one of those golden age comics, where
yes,
the characters have to talk to themselves because there's no one else there.
right. They're
I have
narrating.
a
Yeah,
theory
they're
on this, by the
narrating
way,
their
but please
actions.
go on.
Yeah, they're narrating their actions, curses, whatever. I've been thwarted or So I mean but I have a soft spot for that. I mean, I have a soft spot for that again. And I mean I for the episode I was talking before the show with the guys, and I dug out my beat up copy of Saga of Old City, which was the full novel that this takes in place in between, this story takes place in between this novel, Saga of Old City, and then Artifact of Evil, right? So it's nostalgia overload for me, and I mean, I was flipping through my, and I have to agree, Chert's kind of a jackass in this. And I really do agree with you as well that XJ, that he does protest too much in that intro where he says, I didn't know until I finished writing the novel and this story that there was this very close parallel to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Come on, man. You listed them as appendix and inspiration in the Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition. Just own it. If you wanted your own version of Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, go for it. You have your rogue and you have your giant barbarian. I mean, come on. And the style and the way he writes is very reminiscent of Fritz Leiber. Maybe even just a little more flowery, but I mean, just own it. If it's an homage, it's an homage. You don't even have to calling it out makes it seem like it's exactly what you're trying to do. So,
I
no,
mean,
but I mean, go ahead.
nobody would have said a thing if he hadn't actually pointed his finger at it. Is what
Right.
I thought.
Exactly. You're like, I know this definitely isn't a pastiche or an homage to Gord, to Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, or just take my word on that. Like, okay. Otherwise, I was shocked at the curse words, like bullshit. I mean, not that that's too crazy terrible, but bullshit and shit, in a Dragon magazine. I mean, hey man, the '80s were great. See, that's the '80s for you. It's like by the time I was picking up, I don't remember. I mean, I collected my share of Dragon magazine back in the day, and I don't remember any curse words like written in. But maybe by the time I was picking them up in the late '80s, it was different. But it was just a few years later, so maybe I missed a few curse words or choice words in my copies of the Dragon mag back in the day.
I
But
think
that
if
was interesting.
you basically own the company, you're just allowed to write this kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's gonna stop here.
Exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, it was like, hey, I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then, of course, Chert and his approach to women and the barmaids and looking for various, ladies of the night reminded me of the random harlot table in the Dungeon Master's Guide. That I'm like from back in the day. I'm like, okay, all right, Gary, what's up? But anyway, all those things aside, I really it made me want to like kind of go back and take a look at the Greyhawk setting again, and kind of like it was just the nostalgia overload again. I can go over the language maybe being a little too purpley prose, but at some points, but most of the time it doesn't bother me. I thought the adventure was like, wow, someone sat down and had like a solo adventure one night with Gary or something, and he got inspiration for this story. You know, uh, so it was like a one-on-one DM. That's what I pictured. It was like an old school adventuring session for role playing for Dungeons and Dragons, and I appreciated that. It really kind of gets me going. I didn't explore. I'd be curious to see what you guys think of actually trying to explore the rules of this Dragonchess, which Gary claims is easy to learn, but I'm like, okay, there's a lot of rules in there. Pretty much, I think typical of Gygax back in the day. When he got into AD&D. But I don't know. Anyone trying to delve into learning some Dragon Chess?
Nope,
Yes.
can't say I did. Yeah, tell us, Nikki.
Well, Dragon Chess is a free planar chess where you have three boards instead of one. The middle one, most of the pieces on that one kind of follow the chess rules, except for they have special moves where they can go above or below, right, to the other different planes. On the top side, you've got the sky board, and on the sky board, you've got the most powerful piece, which is the dragon, the sliffs, and I think griffins, and they basically move haphazardly uh, on on the on the sky board, and the dragon is able to basically attack. Um, ba- yeah, as far as I know, it even can go down into the underground level with its breathing fire uh, style attack. Imagine if someone looked at chess, something that has been with us for like almost maybe 6,000 years during the history of humanity, and has decided, you know what? There's not enough pieces on this board. That's Dragonchess. It overcomplicates the game in many ways, where you have to keep track of three boards at the same time, and with a bunch of these pieces being able to attack upwards or downwards. Um, you could really get yourself into a situation where you lose a lot of pieces consecutively. Like, you could lose five pieces as your opponent just starts gobbling up all of the all of the important equipment that you've got there, by simply using the planes, the other parts of the board. It's exciting, but for it to really be a fun game, you have to both understand each piece and how they move and why they move that way. I mean, in one you know, from one side, you have to look at this as just over complex chess. It functions the same way where if you know each piece and how they move, you can play this game, right? The problem is that there's so many pieces and so many rules that unless you play it frequently, you're just bound to forget that, oh, this one has a special thing that they can do, and so on and so forth, right? So my overall impression of Dragon Chess is that it's pretty cool, and obviously you would want to play it during a D&D game against one of your players, right? They come into a tavern, or they're meeting with a lord, and they offer him to play Dragon Chess. But as soon as you look at the rules with your players, you're going to be like, okay, we're just making intelligence checks to see which one of you is better at playing it, because we're not playing
Right.
this out.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a great idea, right? I wish it was just a little bit less complicated, just a little bit. And I think if it was like that, then people would really enjoy it. But the
Yeah.
complexity is quite deterring. I have to admit. Um,
All
yeah,
right.
there's your Dragon Chess review.
Wow. Well, I'm impressed that Gygax came up with a overly complicated game just for a short story. But then, Gygax is a games designer after all. So
I wonder if this is not like an accident. Maybe he was working on Dragon Chess, and he was also wanting to promote his new book. So he decided to kill two birds with one stone and wrote a short story featuring Dragon Chess.
could be,
Yeah,
could be.
yeah. I think so. I think that's a very likely scenario. He's
I
like, I got this
mean,
idea for, hey, for chess. I mean, and honestly, like, 4D chess has been around since the original Star Trek series, right? So it's kind of like,
mhm.
I was like, all right, he kind of wanted like, his own version of like 4D chess or 3D chess or whatever it was. 3D chess, 4D, I don't know what it was back in the TOS, but yeah, he wanted his own version of that. So it's like, okay, he was inspired by that maybe, and Yeah, but I think he definitely was trying to like say, "Hey, I got these ideas. Let me write a story too."
Yeah, I mean it's pretty obvious to me that the idea for Dragonchess had been cooking in his head for a little while, because it's very detailed for off the cuff idea that just spring from nowhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Uh, I am impressed with the fact that he did come up with a functioning game, even though it's very very complicated according to Nikki. I gotta confess though, I didn't go through the game rules. It's like usually when writers have supplements like that, I am full of admiration, but I usually don't check it out, and that could be my fault, a fault of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the assignments are generally we want to read a story, not learn how to play a game. I guess on the show, right? So that's fine.
Well,
I think you're okay. I started skimming
It's.
through them, and
I have to say. I have to say, though, I agree with you that um, it may have seemed to be a waste of time. I have to also confess that knowing the rules made me enjoy the story more. Oh,
oh,
we have Robert.
we apologize for that, dear viewers. Robert joined us late because there was it's daylight savings, and then we had a misalignment of scheduling, and we had to do the usual technical check to make sure the sound is coming all right from his end. So with that, let's resume our discussion of at Moonset Blackcat Comes. And perhaps you can ask Rob to tell us what he thinks about the story, since the rest of us had already given our 2 cents worth of
I haven't
opinions.
yet.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't yet. No, I haven't. But
Oh.
I am a generous man, and I will let Robert go first.
Oh, all right then. Well, I've got a mixed sort of reaction to this story. I'm not the best possible reader because I'm not an addict of this particular genre, unless it's written superbly well, as it is by Robert E. Howard. I'll get over the negative stuff first and then say some positive things about it. Negative is I don't think it was tremendously well written. I think overloaded chat at the start, which is not like what real people, even real imaginary people, would say in that sort of situation. Bit too ornate, the kind of weight that the sentences have to carry. That's really my main criticism of it, and it sounds like a trivial one, but actually it's enough to seriously annoy a reader. The positive things I've got to say is that I thought the plot was very good, and particularly the ending, where the fact that the hero, if you can call him that, I think is highly obnoxious. But anyway, the protagonist was sent to do a job and was set up to fail, but just to create a diversion for the benefit of the person who sent him. And I think that's very nice touch indeed. I thought that the use of modern day swear words was very pathetic, with the word beginning with a B. But then that's just my idiosyncrasy. I don't think vulgarity as such, overt vulgarity, goes with the heroic genre at all. Although, of course, you can assume that people like Conan and these people in this story would actually use bad language naturally, but one would assume that it's best for it to be described indirectly, in order not to break the spell, the kind of magic spell of the narrative. That's just the way I look at it. Anyway, that's really all the main things I've got to say.
I will pick up on what Robert has said, and I will. Well, you didn't actually say any positive. You said I'll start with the negatives, and then you never said a positive. Do you want to reconcile that?
Yeah, the positive is that the plot is very good.
Ah, yes, that's right. Okay, so actually, I agree with like 90% of what Robert says. I agree that the sentences are overbearing. There's sometimes, well, there were moments when I read this story, and I felt physically I needed to breathe out because I was just so, I felt almost assaulted by the complexity of the sentences. And they weren't complex in places where it mattered, they were just complex, right? And of course, Gygax is famous for his Gigantian language, and that looks fine when someone is describing rules because you have to be precise. But at the same time, even then, he would start using different terminology for the same action, right? And that would further confuse you. Because you would not know if a turn and a round are the same thing or not, and so on and so forth. But irregardless, that does create a problem for a reader if they are coming in and they're doing their best to follow the story. But just like Robert, I believe that the story itself is magnificent. The plot is really intricate and interesting, and it's almost like Gygax is fighting himself. He's telling this interesting story, but he's writing it in such a complex way where people stop sounding like people and just, attempt to be these individuals upon a stage, playing something by Shakespeare, but without the masterstroke of genius that is Shakespeare to back them up when it comes to the actual dialogue. However, it still oozes that, sword and sorcery thing that many tales of the same genre who fall in the same issues as Gygax did fail to create. At least in this story, you can generally feel the atmosphere. You can get lost in this city. You can feel like you're there and watching Gord play Dragonchess. There's other minor things that really annoyed me. Like, for example, so there's a character who's called Death Spider. And that's, number one, that's a terrible name, but okay. In the next paragraph, he becomes Spider Death.
Oh, yeah. I saw that. Yeah, I wanted to bring that up too. I'm like, you needed some editorial action there because it was like, wait, unless he calls himself both things, they transposed the death and the spider. It was like Death Spider and then Spider Death. Neither name is really that original, or it's kind of corny. But
I have to say Spider Death sounds a little bit more interesting than Death Spider, because Death Spider, you kind of Death Spider, it's a deadly spider, whatever. But Spider Death, that you could insert some mystery into that. Like, what does that mean? Like maybe he's some philosophical dude who talks about the spider and his death. He creates poems for the people he's about to kill. Who knows? Anyway, the whole story revolves around Gord. And just like Robert said, if you find him annoying, you're not going to have a good time. If you think his persistence and tomfoolery is something that you'd enjoy, right? It's something that speaks to you, then you're gonna enjoy the story much more, right? But for someone like Robert, who found him obnoxious, I can totally understand why all of these issues that arise from the tale magnify. Um, you also have to look at the story from the perspective of what is it trying to show us. And I'm very surprised by this tale. I'd like to hear what the rest of you have to say about this point as well. Um, to me, this feels too much high fantasy for Gygax. When he speaks of the nitty gritty of his desires, of what he wants to see during his games, when he would run Dungeons and Dragons, he would talk about realism and hardships and so on and so forth. But here you have a lowly thief who is able to not only kill 3 people, but also, um, fight off perilous magical traps, and then get rid of 2 magic users, two mages. Somehow, this guy who is at first was described as a novice, and then at the end of the tale, kind of becomes this super kung fu ninja. It broke me out of the story. I don't know if you guys felt the same, and this is what I really
Yeah,
want to hear from you.
yeah. Because and I've read some Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. I've read some Fritz Leiber Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories, and that was sort of not against well, a little bit of a spoiler alert. That was sort of the origin story of, or part of the origin story for the Grey Mouser was like he slew his master who was a sorcerer who was like abusing him or something. So it was like, I don't know, it's like this again, it's the game thing kind of bleeds over in, and the influence that he says is not an influence from Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser in the beginning of the story with his disclaimer sort of was like, okay, well, the Gray Mouser was sort of a spellcaster rogue who could overcome wizards with like various tricks and artifacts or whatever. So I was like, okay, I don't know. Yeah, I was a little dubious about that too. But again, it's like, the two-sided sword is, well, it's a good old-fashioned like kind of role-playing session put onto paper as a story. But at the same time, it's like your influences are kind of showing that you protested too much about in the beginning of with your disclaimer, like this really isn't inspired by Fafhrd the Grey Mouser. I'm like, yeah, but we know you were totally aware of Fafhrd the Grey Mouser from back in the day when you wrote the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I was like, just own it. Why? If it's an homage, whatever, just own it. But yeah, I don't know. It seemed like it was something that was like a Gray Mouser thing, where it's like even he could overcome with his thiefy ways and subtle sorceries to overcome magic users. So yeah.
What about you, XJ? Did you feel like at the beginning of the tale we were more or less in low fantasy territory, realism, and then it spun out of control at the end? Did you feel the same shift?
So I don't have any. I haven't read Gygax at or any of his stories at all. The only thing I read about Gygax is his source books, really. So I didn't have any expectations going in. I did. The beginning of the story did set a tone of more of low, I would say low magic with the, well, not necessarily low magic, but the protagonist doesn't have magic and uses his wits to outsmart wizards. And then it got to the point where he was doing anime ninja flips, like you said, Nikki, and I was like, the action is a little bit flowery. And then slowly over the next few pages, his magical items got introduced as well, and I was like, okay, so this is how it's supposed to go. I don't feel anything out of place, to be honest, mostly because I don't have any expectations. However, I did think the some of the actions are a little bit over the top. That somersault backflip thingamajiggy that he did, leaping over the heads of a couple of people. I mean, that is not something you can normally do. Yeah.
You touched upon something there when you were talking about not having expectations. This this story, in its isolation, seems to me to portray a character who's down on his luck at the beginning, right? And he's not really, he's not really someone to
Down on
think of. No.
Down on his luck. Wait. That if that is an intention, then Gary Gygax really failed, because the Black Cat Gord did not come across as down on his luck. He came across as having just pulled off several successful heists, because here he is going around spending money.
That's right. I agree with you completely. But like the forward seems to give you this idea, right? If you recall, it basically says, right, the real adventure for this guy is going to be in this novel that I'm releasing. But here's him years earlier, just beginning his career or something like along those lines. And then you begin reading the story, and it kind of maybe feels that way, and then there's this whole exchange between Gord and the sorcerer, and the sorcerer calls him by his thief nickname, which, by the way, I find hilarious. The idea that a thief has like secret identity, very very old school type of stuff. But anyway, and yeah, this guy has reputation, and he's got magical items.
Yeah, I didn't get the sense that he's down on his luck, and to be quite honest, I completely ignored the forward. As to me, the forward was just Gary Gygax protesting too much. I was like, no, guys, believe me, I really wasn't using the Grey Mouser. I really wasn't. That's basically the forward for me. But I don't wanna.
Let me read you the thing that I believe is pointing towards what I'm saying. At the time of this story, Gord is about 21 years of age, and his barbarian comrade Chert. By the way, Chert means devil in Russian. Is but a year or two older. They are both typical young adults, not dissimilar to what I was and what you will be or were at such an age. Think about and remember that, please. Times, circumstances, and technology change, but people don't. The tale involves fun adventure and a sprinkling of the swordplay and sorceress doings so necessary to any effort in this genre.
I mean, I don't dispute anything you say. It's just I mostly just ignore the forward, because the entire forward just sounds a lot like Gary Gygax justifying himself.
Of course. I'm doing this mostly for the benefit of the reader, so they know what we're talking about.
Fair enough.
Of the reader, the viewer.
The listener.
Whatever. He also goes on to say, there occurs herein a learning experience which will stand our hero in good stead later in his life. And anyway, the story on its own merits, right? If you ignore the forward, if you ignore any sort of expectations you may have for Gygax or this genre, it still has its issues. And I selected it remembering it differently in my mind. I was the one who suggested this story. When I was younger, this read a lot better. Upon revisiting it, it has not aged like the fine wine I wish it did. And I do see it from a more cynical point of view, like Robert did, which is ultimately terrible for me because I really wanted to relive those experiences as a child, rereading this, but alas, it was not meant to be.
I mean
Yeah,
that.
I was wondering if Robert had ever read any Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser as well, and getting his take on similarities as such.
Yeah, I tried once to read a Falford and Grey Mouser story, and I found it unendurable. Whereas at least the Gygax one, I managed to finish. So I think Gygax scores over Fritz Leiber in this particular department. Although Leiber, I mean, I like Leiber's Conjure Wife and one or two of his short stories, but this sort of Fafhrd stuff I couldn't get on with, I'm afraid. I don't know why not. I just couldn't. It just seemed very, very dull, and the characters seemed uninteresting to me.
What did you think of Gygax's intro to the story, where he put a disclaimer in saying that he really didn't he wasn't aping Fritz Leiber and his
Well,
Fafhrd and Grey Mouser?
I thought he probably wasn't consciously aping, but he probably had the same sort of interests that Leiber had in writing his stories, and therefore naturally gravitated towards the same kind of characters, which after all, it's a good combination of characters. It's just that it needs to be done in a non-boring way, and I don't think Leiber managed to do that. Not for me, anyway.
See, I've always enjoyed Fritz Leiber's stuff. I mean, I have to take a break from those stories, though, from the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser stories. Yes, because of just the prose is just so overwhelming, and the cheese sometimes is spread on so thick. You know, it just So it can be. You really kind of have to be into that sort of reading at that time. You know, I can only take it in certain doses of that storytelling style. Same thing with sort of Gygax after a while, I feel like. But yeah, we can agree there. It can be a bit of an overload of purple prose.
I don't mind purple prose, as long as the subject matter is kind of interesting. Now, I find it very difficult to justify my lack of interest, because what is there to be not interested in? I don't really understand it. I just know that Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser were a struggle for me to read, and in the end I thought, why am I bothering with this stuff? So I stopped. Whereas somebody might write about almost exactly the same sort of thing, and I'd find it a lot better. And actually Gygax is, in my view, a lot better, but it could just be that I was more in the mood for it this time than I was umpteen years ago when I tried the Leiber version.
At least I feel like Gary's plot in this story was fast-paced, whereas I do feel like maybe sometimes in some of the Leiber stories, the plot may be buried too much and obscure, whereas this plot was but I think that's also because of just Gary's focus on moving a story ahead for gaming purposes. You know, I think that maybe shows his gaming background, where you're like, you don't want to bore the players, just like you don't want to bore a reader. So let's keep it going. You know, whereas I feel like Leiber maybe was a little more languid and with his plots and plot development. So, but yeah, I think mood is also a big part of reading these stories. And it's interesting because I think you guys were also pointing out earlier, before I lose track of this one thought, is that, yeah, Gary seems like it's weird. There is this weird tension between Gary Gygax and like, oh, well, wanting like low fantasy, but really like high fantasy really gets injected in there and pretty quickly into this story and into like Dungeons and Dragons too. So it's that again is a protesting too much sort of situation, right?
I gotta admit though that the concept of low fantasy for Dungeons and Dragons just doesn't work.
Right. I agree.
Yes, for the Dungeons and Dragons system, I definitely agree with you. But there have been very great attempts, I would even say successes, to create low fantasy games. For instance, a game that's very famous in the current let's say meta is Zweihander. Zweihander is a copy of the Warhammer games style of storytelling, right? And when I'm talking about Warhammer, I don't mean the space version. I'm talking about the dwarves and elves version, right? There's like two Warhammer universes. But to come back to it, Zweihander basically has so many rules when it comes to injuries and strange things happening when you do use magic and so on and so forth that it sort of desensitizes the people playing and makes them feel like maybe we shouldn't delve too deep into this magic stuff because when you do, horrible consequences occur when you do something wrong, right? So there is a way to both have a very high magic setting and system, and also make it so that the players are reluctant to use it to keep that low fantasy feel. It's just very hard.
I mean,
Yeah.
for sure. It's just like um, if Gary Gygax makes if Gary Gygax had made statements about trying to keep his campaign low magic, then I mean what I meant was it's like it's not even in the same ballpark because how can you have a low magic setting where you have people tossing off fireballs and magic missiles? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a proper low magic setting is, in my mind, the first few books of Song of Ice and Fire. That is proper low magic. You have some fantasy elements. They're not there all the time. Most of it is still taken up with very petty human concerns. And the magic never got to the point where it can start doing miraculous stuff. That to me is low magic.
Right. I would agree. Yeah.
Actually, I do want to. Well, probably Rob wouldn't be wouldn't be catching it. But do you guys caught the review for Rex Fellis at the end?
No.
No. Yeah. Rex. So I thought it was interesting because Rex Fellis is I don't know, I don't remember the name, but he's either Bast or Bastion, the demigod of cats.
I see.
Yeah, he was.
No, I must
in-
admit I
yeah.
didn't. I didn't catch that. Yeah, go on.
I totally forgot about that as well. But I think, yeah, that was sort of the implication, right, at the end, or
Yeah, that is. I thought that was a pretty interesting insert because uh, uh, it's it is to me that insert makes Gord a definitely a chosen one. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I'm just wondering if Gord is sort of a self-insert for Gary in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of times authors do have. So it's not. Gord is so great. He has this god being the chosen one. But I guess that's like a D&D thing where it's like there's the chosen of certain gods. That happens in like other settings too. But But
For
yeah,
sure,
it's
man.
like, you know,
But I thought I don't know how I feel about the insert for Rex Fellis at the end, the review, because it basically turns I mean, to me it was never a low fantasy, and it became very quickly evident. It became very evident quickly towards in the middle that our friend Gord is definitely not just a thief who's pitting his wits against sorcerer's might kind of story, with all his magic items and his somersaulting capabilities, but the attention from a demigod that really turns it into a chosen one story for me.
yeah, and not low fantasy for sure.
Yeah, and that foreshadowing on his very special ring. Was it a
Yeah.
ring or was it the amulet? Like that to me was I get that this is like a promotional short story for his book, but I did feel that was a very, I can't say that it's bad, just I lose any further interest in God, I have to say.
I lost interest in him when it turned out that he was a killer of just sentries, harmless sentries who were just guarding a house. I mean, all right, kill necromancers, they have it coming to them, but not a sentry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
typical Dungeons and Dragons player right there, Gord.
Yeah.
Murderer and thief.
Yeah.
You know, the more I think about the story, the more authentic it feels to Dungeons and Dragons. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because considering that a lot of times Dungeons and Dragons games degenerate into players capturing and torturing NPCs for information. There's no levels of depravity that some of us old school gamers would get up to. Like, slaughtering monsters and, willy-nilly without any kind of parlay. Who cares how intelligent they might be if you're invading their nest or their homes? Kill them and take their stuff, man. Murder hobo all the way, right? So it's just, yeah. And tell me, hey, Gord could have easily snuck past those guys. If he was so great, he could have snuck past those guards and spared their lives for sure. So he was just a sadistic bastard at that point, right?
Possibly. I mean, it wasn't it definitely tanks the complexity of the story for me, because if the problems that God is, if all his solution to problems for if God's solution to all his problems are violence and killing, then he becomes a much less interesting character altogether, and that feels more like a Chert angle than a God angle, if that's what it's supposed to be. But either way, I thought I just felt like the insertion of the demigod of cats to be not sure you should be going in this direction, Mr. Gygax, but well, it's your book.
Yeah, talk about Deus Ex Machina all the way, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't have anything else to say about the short story, I think.
I have a question for Robert.
Go ahead.
So Robert, would you say, right, the complexity of this work is apparent, right? There's a lot of overbearing sentences. When you talked about the dialogue between those people, do you feel like at any point the story recovers? Did it ever feel to you that, oh, this could be said by somebody, or was it just, was it all just the same throughout? Or did you feel...
No, it wasn't the same throughout. My remarks about the dialogue mainly to do with the scene setting at the beginning. Middle and end, I don't recall anything particularly particularly annoying about the dialogue, and the ending, in fact, was quite good. So it is, as I say, it seemed incompetent scene setting to me at the beginning. I would prefer, actually, a sort of gentle authorial introduction to the scene. The author buttonholing the reader and saying, the setting of this story is blah, 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 blah. Just like, well, there was a skit I remember on TV, somebody in a play picking a phone up and saying, yes, this is an ordinary suburban house in the 1920s, and then putting the phone down. And that was meant to set the scene, you see, whereas it would have been better to say, well, not to say it, but to show that it was that. And I have no objections to authors just setting a scene just in their own words, rather than getting characters to belabor the point, just so as to avoid telling the reader what the reader has to be told anyway. So you might as well do it, directly from the author, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Thank you very much. I was just really wondering about that point. All right. Well, I mean, I would give this story, if I was still the same person who read it when I was 16, I would say the story gets a 10 out of 10, hundreds. I would give it a Robert score. But now a lot more sober in both mind and body. If a lot less sober, in different ways. I would give it a 6.5 out of 10.
Right.
What about you, Robert? What do you give it?
I would give it a lower score than that, partly because of the story, and partly the lowness of the score is partly directed against myself because of my limitations as a reader. So it's not all the author's fault, it's partly my fault as a reader. I would give it a 4. So the 4 is not just for the story, it's for the interaction between the story and me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it was a pretty bad interaction.
Yeah.
Anthony, what about you? What's your score?
I think that this gets the benefit of some nostalgia for me. It was really like nostalgia overload again with a story like this. I have a soft spot in my heart for role playing and for Gary Gygax, Saint Gary, as we often call him in the role playing world, especially those of us who are old veteran D&D players. So I'm going to give this a score of, it really gets pumped up to an 8 for me because of, I feel like the nostalgia. I feel like, because it's Gary, he went through the effort of creating this very complex game that I feel like hopefully is playable in this Dragonchess. So, I think it gets knocks because it's like, this was clearly an homage to Fafhrd and Grey Mouse, or just own it. I don't know if he had to state those things just for maybe thinking he needed to maybe not get sued by the Fritz Lieber or his estate by making it so close, but I don't see how that's a thing. He could have used an editor in spots and maybe have made it less mustache twirly. Haha, you kill the 3 guards and then you have to say, now there's 3 less guards. You don't have to, you already showed us, you don't have to tell us. So I think I'm going to stick with my 8. Again, it's Gary. I love him. I love my Saint Gary. I love my role playing. This was like a nostalgia trip, but could have used some editorial help, and he definitely needed to just own the homage to Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. So I guess XJ or
I guess I'll give
Bring
it
it up.
a. I guess I'll give it a 6. It's like decent fast food, I suppose. Except I don't eat fast food anymore. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for. Just a final word. it probably would have gotten a higher score from me if Rex Fellis didn't turn out to be a demigod at the end. That's about it. Yeah. Right. I guess that's it on the short story at Moonset Blackcat Comes. All right. Well, we will leave the listeners to have a great week or weekend ahead, whatever time they may be listening to this, and please support the podcast. See y'all later.